It is an honor for me to welcome you to this virtual production of Witness Theater for 2021. It is Self-Help's mission to serve as the last surviving relative to victims of Nazi persecution. Since we brought Witness Theater to New York in 2012, it has transformed the lives of the survivors and students who have participated and the thousands of people like you who have watched Witness Theater performances. The performance you are about to see honors and shares the stories of Lori, Brenda, Mila, Evie, and Olga, celebrates these extraordinary individuals and reminds us of the strength of human resilience. The 7 remarkable young people you are about to meet hail from a range of schools and backgrounds across the New York metropolitan area. In the last year, the COVID-19 pandemic has forced us all to adapt. Our Witness Theater programs were held virtually, and we saw 3 different groups of students and survivors share stories, build relationships, and support each other in the virtual world. The survivors' resilience, not only in the face of the Holocaust, but today as they face the pandemic, serves as an invaluable example to students and to ourselves. Our deepest thanks to UJA-Federation of New York, a sincere partner, for their continuing support of Witness Theater in New York through the years. As always, we are inspired by the 2 generations who have come together to ensure that the legacy of survival is not forgotten and to honor the memories of those who died. We thank all of you who have come to bear witness and to share this powerful experience with us.
Hello, and welcome to today's performance of Why We Tell the Story. My name is Jessica Ash, and I am the drama therapist and director. Witness Theater is a 9-month intergenerational program that brings Holocaust survivors and adolescents together. This program is an opportunity for survivors to pass down their stories and build meaningful relationships in the process. Usually, at the end of this process, there is a live therapeutic theater performance, but due to the pandemic we're all living in, we created a film instead. All participants and staff members have dedicated so much of their time in order to create this film. Students, thank you so much for your hard work and dedication to ensure that these stories won't be forgotten. And to our survivors, Lori, Olga, Brenda, Mila, and Evie, I think I speak on behalf of the entire group by saying that it has been an honor working with you all. Curious, smart, loving, passionate, determined warriors are just a few words to describe you all. These stories have the potential to become our guides as we reflect on the kind of world that we would like to live in. Thank you so much for watching and enjoy Why We Tell This Story.
I learned that hope was an illusion, a trick to keep myself alive, only to feel more pain. How can a child start all over again? But I'm not a child. I don't want to be afraid anymore.
I look at things as interesting rather than disastrous.
Nazis killed us physically, but communism killed us physically and mentally. As a Jew, you always had to be ready to someone to spit in your face and your soul.
My parents thought that if they had a French-born child, it could save their lives. They were wrong.
The loss of my brother left me feeling like I had to try to be perfect, like I had to compensate in many ways, like I had to be the most devoted daughter.
I resisted hearing about the war. I didn't want to be a victim. I rebelled against it.
I like to think that being a writer saved my parents' lives.
Where were the adults? They allowed me to become a nomad with no home, no language, no culture to call my own. But I am still here. I, the perpetual refugee, the wandering Jew, the survivor.
I think I'm more likely to think of life as interesting than to find it devastating. I remember that when we got to the train station, there was a girl crying, and I said, Mutti, look, that girl is crying. I'm not crying like her. And my Mutti said, yes, you're being very brave. I'm so proud of you. But in my own mind, I was pretty sure that I ought to have been crying. How you deal with disaster is interesting. I was born in 1928 in Vienna.
I was an only child. In 1937, I remember hearing my father and my Uncle Paul often having this conversation.
You're talking about a handful of lunatics who are taking an extreme position. I mean, what are we supposed to do? Hide in the attic every time a madman in Germany makes a speech?
We should pack our bags and get out of this country.
And go where? Into the jungle and live on coconuts?
Uncle Paul was the true man in my life. After the Nazis invaded and I was kicked out of school for being Jewish, Uncle Paul would become my tutor. We would read poems, look at art, and he would ask my mind to perform more than it could. He evoked my imagination and empathy. So much of who I am today is because of Uncle Paul. That December, we got word of an experimental children's transport being sent to England. My father took me to the headquarters where it looked like thousands of Jews had lined up around the block. My father took me around back and asked to see a family friend who worked for the organization. That is how I got my name on the list. I was number 152. Number 152.
I'm giving you a list of people who you need to find sponsors for once you arrive in England. You will need to write letters helping us out of Vienna. Do everything you can.
I could do this. I would write and tell people about what was happening in Vienna. And I would write and I would get everybody out.
"500 children, 500 suitcases, hundreds of parents, hundreds of goodbyes. Do not get upset. Do not get upset. Do not get upset. Vati's gray coat, Mutti's black fur coat, Mutti's tiny face forcing a smile. Mutti, look at that girl. She's crying. I'm not crying like her."
I know. You're being very good and very brave. I'm so proud of how good you're being.
This will be interesting. You get to add England and Holland to the places you've visited.
But in my own mind, I was pretty sure that I ought to have been crying.
England will be an adventure. We traveled first by train and then by boat. It took 3 days before arriving in England.
In my memory, I walk off the boat by myself until I found this picture. I was actually surrounded by others the entire time. How you deal with disaster is interesting.
Once we arrived, we spent a week at the Dovercourt camp waiting to be adopted. At Dovercourt camp, they kept us busy. There were many activities keeping us distracted until we were placed into foster homes. We were encouraged to dance the hora, which became the soundtrack to that week. However, I didn't have time to dance the hora. I kept hearing my Vati's voice in my head.
You will need to write letters finding sponsors to help us get out of Vienna.
It was there that I met the writer I would soon become. A few days later, as I was attempting to bury what was now the old and smelly sausage that my mother insisted she pack for me, I saw an image that was profound. One single bright red rose with a clump of freshly fallen snow on it. I would write letters to the refugee committee in London using this symbol. I would say to the sponsors that the Viennese Jews were the roses left over in the winter of the Nazi occupation. I would write that they are dying of the cold, and if good people like you don't pluck the roses now, the Nazis will come and cut them down. I was so excited to have made this connection. A few days later, I was at the first of the 5 foster homes that I would live in, Mrs. Levine's house. I woke up the first morning not knowing what I was supposed to do. Where to go, which door to open, and when I found the right door, should I just walk in? Will they be talking about me? Should I just wait until someone invites me in? Do I need an excuse to walk in? It never occurred to me that I could just walk into a room in other people's houses. I was a stranger in other people's houses. During that year at Mrs. Levine's home, I spent the majority of my time sitting by the fireplace, writing to my parents and writing to find sponsors. I developed a technique which was if I could stare at the fire long enough to make my eyes burn and my chest ache, I could fill up with tears, but then arrest them so that they neither flowed nor receded. I had control. I had control. I was in control. Dear Mutti and Vati, I was taken by a woman who chose me to go home with her. The people that I'm living with are very rich. They have 5 maids. There's a fat lady sewing here who wants me to call her Auntie Essie, but I'm not going to. She doesn't look like an aunt to me. I found the chocolates you hid at the bottom of my suitcase. I love them. Oh, and what does Orthodox mean? The woman asked me if I was this before I left Dovercourt camp. Anyway, I said yes, even though I wasn't sure. Mrs. Levine wanted me to go on walks and play with other children. Sometimes I did, but I usually just wanted to write. It was here that I began writing what would become my autobiography. I would let the English know what was really happening under Hitler, just as I promised my Vati. I would expose Adolf Hitler to the world. A year later, on my 11th birthday, my parents arrived at Mrs. Levine's house. Had that letter about the snow-capped rose that I sent to the refugee committee worked? Had the Willoughby family been so moved by my letter that they decided to sponsor my parents on a married couple's visa? They had gotten out. Had being a writer saved my parents' lives?
I've had a lot of life, and yes, I still prefer to look at it as interesting rather than a calamity.
My brother's death left me feeling like I had to try very hard to be perfect and to compensate and to be the most devoted daughter. I guess it felt like I had to be both children for my parents.
I was born in 1937 in a small town called Holuby in Poland. Poland was divided into two parts, and we were very fortunate to be under the Russian occupation from 1939 to 1941. But then, in 1941, Nazis invaded and we were forced to leave. Before we left, my father buried our Kiddush cups in our backyard. Maybe he thought we would return. We went to hide deep in the forest with my mom, dad, brother, aunt, and uncle. I was 5 at the time.
We have to find a way to get Pinula to stop crying. He's going to get us all killed.
He's hungry. He needs milk.
How will we find milk? We don't have any money. We don't have anything.
We do have something. We have my wedding ring.
So it was decided my mother would give up her wedding ring to a farmer in exchange for daily milk for Pinula. My father and uncle started working for farmers in exchange for a little money, which helped us eat. They would go off during the day while me, my mother, my aunt, and younger brother would continue hiding in the forest. Even though my brother was given a bit of milk each day, he still kept crying. He still put the group in danger. There was just no way we could continue hiding out with him.
What do you think about giving him up to a family just until the war is over?
I heard a lot of families are doing that with babies and young children. I mean, how else could we expect to keep a child quiet for so long?
These families can keep him safe.
No, absolutely not.
Blaikie, we need to at least think about it.
There's nothing to think about. I will not give up my child for even a day.
Mendel, you must talk to her. Having Pinula with us is a risk. Mark my words, we will all die if this child stays with us.
My darling Blaikie, Pinula has not stopped crying for days. We need to find a proper home for him, just until the war is over. Everything will be all right. This is the right decision. It's the only way for us to stay alive.
So at age 2, Pinula went to live with a family who promised to take care of him until the war ended. It was only after hiding that we found out that a group of Nazis entered the home. They knew that Pinula did not belong to this family and that he was Jewish. He was immediately shot and killed. He was 2.
I remember none of this. Is that normal? I must have blocked it out. All 2 years that we hid out in the forest, I have one distinct memory. I would sleep on my father's chest at night and he would rock me back and forth, and that was the only way I could fall asleep.
Then, after 2 years of hiding, my uncle had had enough. We knew that the Russians were close, but my uncle decided that instead of waiting, we would travel to them. So in the winter of 1944, we left hiding in the forest. . My father and uncle took turns carrying me all night. Once we reached heavy bombing, we knew we had reached the Russians. By the time we arrived, my mother, aunt, and I all had typhus. My father was able to find an Israeli doctor who helped all of us get better. Once we were liberated, my father decided that he did not want to go to a DP camp.
I don't want to be told what to do. I want to be in control. The war is over. I just want our freedom back.
Before leaving Poland, my father went back to our house and dug up the 2 Kiddush cups that he had buried in the backyard. With my grandfather's Kiddush cups in my father's hand, we were ready to go. We traveled from Poland to Budapest and then eventually arrived in Italy. Italy was my savior. Italy felt like a relief. From what? I'm not even sure. Italy was stability, comfort, friendships, freedom, beauty. My mom would make dough, and then I would get on my bike and take it to the baker. While riding my bike, I felt so untethered. Wind in my hair, beauty all around. This feeling was the opposite of hiding. It was the opposite of concealing who I was. It was the opposite of my last 2 years. This feeling was freedom, and I would never have to hide out again. After 4 wonderful years in Italy, my father's aunt sponsored my mother, father, and me to come to New York. This adjustment was so hard, and I was overwhelmed with culture shock. But I worked as hard as I could, and I made a great life for myself. At my daughter's wedding, I watched as she drank out of the same Kiddush cups that my father had buried in our backyard in Poland before we left to hide. And now, here they were at my daughter's wedding. The Kiddush cups made me think about my brother, Pinula, who should have been sitting next to me. He should have lived a long life. We should have had a lifetime of conversations. There's so much I wanted to tell you, my Pinula. Pinula, isn't Italy wonderful? The clothes, the language, the food.
Pinula, coming to New York and adjusting to America is so hard. I'm in complete culture shock. I wish you were here with me.
Pinula, I met an amazing man. His name is Moritz. I think I want to marry him.
Pinula, I'm pregnant.
Pinula, I just had my 2nd child. My children's names are Seth and Gloria. You would have made such a wonderful uncle.
Pinula, I'm thinking of going back to school and getting my master's in education. Seth and Gloria have both left the house, and I want to do something for myself.
Pinula, I have 5 amazing grandchildren. Their names are Allison, Emily, Ariella, Shira, Eliza, all girls. Can you believe it?
Pinula, I know my parents missed you, and their pain was always so intense that they lost you. I miss you, Pinula, even though I hardly knew you. I still miss you.
Well, I love to paint. I always did. When I was young, I wanted to be a ballerina. But my grandma told me if I did those splits, I would never find a husband. Then I moved to singing, but soon found out that I was tone deaf. Then I played the piano. But ultimately, I became an artist. I love to paint. And I've also made some small films. Creativity is the gymnastics for the soul to me. And you just can't develop yourself creatively when you're hiding from the Nazis. You just can't. When you're born during the war, you're born into chaos. Maybe that's why I'm comfortable in chaos.
It feels like home. Maybe that's why I'm an artist. My parents met in Antwerp, and in 1941, my father was taken to a camp in the south of France because he was a communist. Somehow he escaped, and then my grandmother and mom met him in Nice. They were told that if they had a French-born child, then this could save them. Well, they were wrong. I was born into hiding in 1943, and when I was 2 months old, they heard that the Gestapo was coming. So we left with a group of 70 Jews to cross the border to Italy. We hid in barns in the mountains, and the men would ski down to get food from the priests in the villages. From there, we made our way to Rome, and then after the war, Belgium. Soon after, my parents divorced, and I had little contact with my father. I lived with my grandma from the ages of 5 to 12, and I moved back in with my mom and stepdad when I was 12. But I was only 3 when I started to become inundated with the stories.
I don't know how I lived through 2 world wars. I've lost everyone, including my new husband, the only man who's ever been kind to me. Do you know that he was taken on the last day of the war in Italy?
8 of my 11 siblings, just gone.
Sometimes my grandmother would just cry at the kitchen table reading the Yiddish newspaper.
Olga, your father and I thought that if we had a French-born child, the Gestapo wouldn't come after us.
Gas chambers. That's how they were able to exterminate so many.
When I was 7 years old, I went over to my friend's house to play until her parents found out.
You are a Jew? Get out of my house now!
My father says we can't play together anymore. Dirty Jew.
Ouch! You can't pull my hair, that hurts!
I've lost everyone.
I can't sleep.
I'm not hungry.
Olga, there's still some food left on your plate. You must eat it all, Babala. Eat, Olga. Eat it all, Babala. Eat, Olga. Eat it all.
You need to finish
There's
your
still some
food or
left
it'll
on
all
your
go to
plate.
waste. Finish your plate. Come
Olga.
on, Olga.
Eat.
You need
Keep
to finish
eating.
eating.
You have to finish this on your plate.
Eat.
Olga,
Keep eating. You need to keep eating. You can't stop. Eat.
Olga,
Keep
eat.
eating.
Eat.
Finish it now.
Finish
Eat.
on your plate.
Keep eating. You can't stop. You can't stop. Keep eating. Eat. Finish it now.
Why in the world were my wife and daughters killed and you stayed alive?
My stepfather said that. I thought that when my mother remarried, he would think of me as his own daughter, but he was just too damaged, I suppose. At this point, I was sent off to a boarding school, but I wasn't interested in school. I kept failing and needing to repeat tests and classes. So the third time I walked into the building unprepared to retake the test, I realized I was done with school for now. I needed to get away. I needed to rebel from what I didn't even know. All I knew was that I needed distance from my family, distance from the stories that I was buried under. I needed to get free. I was an artist and I needed to go find that part of myself. So I left for Israel at 15 and a half. I met my husband on a kibbutz, and a year and a half later, we left for London, where I went to art school. We got married and I had my first boy in London. From there, we wanted to be a part of the hippie movement in San Francisco. And when we moved to New York, I had my second son. My husband was a jazz musician, and our home became an artist community where people would come and create. I felt myself expanding and coming into a certain kind of consciousness. I would sit in the corner painting for hours, listening to these incredible musicians. I was unlocking parts of myself. Eventually, my marriage ended, and I became a single parent, raising 2 boys by myself most of the time. Those days were hard, but I made it through.
The stories that once weighed me down were transforming. Life is amazing. Life is a big university. It helps us grow. I know I came from adversity, being born in a war. You can't develop yourself when you're hiding from Nazis. Consciousness came from doing. I needed to take back my life. Light is a disturbance of the darkness.
Once upon a time, there was an unhappy child. She never learned to experience joy or to feel carefree. The unhappy child in me is still there. I never learned to experience joy or to feel carefree. These are feelings that one learns during childhood, and I was never able to be a child. But I am still here. I, the perpetual refugee, the wandering Jew, the survivor.
Evie.
You are still here.
The perpetual refugee.
The wandering Jew.
The survivor.
The survivor.
The survivor.
The survivor.
The survivor. The survivor.
The survivor.
The beginning, I don't remember. I was born in Paris to 2 Hungarian immigrant parents. It was not a good time to be born between these 2 world wars. I'm sure I absorbed fear and anxiety from my mother's milk. At the beginning of 1941, my father fled south because he was a communist. I would never see him again. My mother and I tried to flee to the unoccupied part of France to be with family, but we were unable to make it and had to go back. A few days later, she left me with my aunt while she went looking for food. She was captured, put on a truck, and sent off. At this point, it was decided that my aunt and I would travel to Hungary where more of my mother's family were living. They cut my hair, dressed me like a boy, and I entered Hungary in disguise as my aunt's son, Claude Polak. It would be the first, but definitely not the last time I would have to change my identity. My earliest memories were in Budapest. I lived with my 2 aunts, uncle, and cousin Peter. My grandmother lived close by. My older cousin Peter was like a brother to me. I was 26 months when I was separated from my mother. I didn't remember her, but she was kept alive through my family.
Where do you think Magda has gone?
I don't know, maybe she was taken?
Taken? Where?
She could be hiding.
Where would she be hiding?
Do you mean where? She could be hiding anywhere.
There's no way to really know.
Who are you talking about?
Magda, our sister and your mother. She's coming back for you very soon. I just know it.
They would talk about her often.
Evie, I remember your mom being so beautiful, so kind, and so loving. I really hope she comes back.
Peter, you knew my mother? But to me, My mother felt like a fairy godmother in a book. I didn't miss her because I didn't remember her. She just didn't feel real to me. Until January 6th, 1944, when our doorbell rang.
Magda?
Aunt Magda?
She could barely stand at first. I was horrified. This was my mother? When she got a little better, she told us what had happened.
I spent 2.5 years in a forced labor camp. And when I was caught sabotaging, I was severely beaten and thrown into solitary confinement for 14 months. At the end, all of the Jews were forced to march to a concentration camp. During the 4th march, I collapsed. I guess the guard didn't want to waste a bullet on me, and when I woke up, I was alone, and that's when I just walked into the woods and hid out until making my way here.
The adjustment of my mother coming back was very hard. She needed medical attention and a new identification paper because she was considered a fugitive. I didn't know her, and at first, I was scared of her. But over time, all 3 sisters became my interchangeable mothers. And then it happened. March 19th, 1944, the Germans had crossed over to Hungary. Everything now was different. This is all we talked about.
I don't want to wear these Jewish stars.
You have to. We don't have a choice.
There's no way to live, fearing for our lives.
Quiet. The children will hear you.
Fearing for our lives?
Where can we go?
I think another bomb is coming.
Stop talking. The children can hear you. Into the cellar.
Into the cellar, Evie.
We need to find papers.
We must get papers.
But who can give us papers?
Papers. Everyone would always talk about these papers.
Into the cellar, I said, now!
And then it was decided. Peter and I would leave with my mom.
Children, we are going away. Your names and birthdays will be changed. Peter, you will now be Janos Schmutzler, my son.
Janos Schmutzler?
Yes, that's right. And Evie, you will be Ilushka Tot, my niece.
Ilushka Tot?
Yes. You must memorize and only refer to each other as these names. This is life or death.
We were brought to the train station and told that my mother's friend would be coming with us. In late spring of 1944, we arrived in a remote village called Lovas Patona. We rented a room from a family of poor peasant farmers. The small town thought we were wealthy Budapest city folks trying to escape the bombing. The fear that I had in Budapest was nothing compared to the fear that would develop in hiding. There were big black spiders all around. I couldn't get away from them no matter what. Our lives were in danger so many times.
Boy, what is your name? Answer me.
Leave him alone. He's shell-shocked. His name is Janos Schmutzler. My name is Ilushka Tot.
How dare you think my child is a Jew? My husband is fighting on the right side.
My name is Ilushka Tot.
You both must sleep in the barn tonight.
But I don't want to.
Today, you have to be a grown-up. Today, you must forget about being afraid.
My name is Ilushka Tot. This list of scary memories could go on and on. But what was consistent was my mother's fierce determination to stay alive. She committed to our false identities like nothing I had ever seen before. And then one night, we all woke up to loud screaming, crying, bombs, gunshots, and bangs on the door. The Soviets had arrived, but did not believe that we were Jewish. My mother screamed out, "Yid! Yid! Jew! Jew!" She screamed it in every language she could think of, but it wasn't until the lieutenant came in and said,
"Prove it."
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad.
And then the lieutenant said the second line.
Baruch Shem Kavod Machuto Leolam Vaed.
He happened to be Jewish, and the Shema saved our life. On March 27th, 1945, our village was declared liberated. We journeyed back to Budapest on a cattle car. A man sitting close by smiled and asked me my name. I froze and looked at my mom. "It's okay," she said. "You can use your real name." "My name is Evie." "Yeah. My name is Evie."
Years ago, it was the Shema that saved our lives. But today, I often find myself saying this kind of prayer. Please, God, before I die, let me feel joy instead of fear when I hear my grandchildren sing the Hebrew song on the holidays. Allow me to revel in their childhood without thinking of mine. Let me believe that my children and their children are free citizens of the land where they were born and in no danger of ever losing that status. And maybe, God, maybe, just for a little while, you could allow me to feel free also, free of fear, free of constant vigilance, of suspicion and insecurity. Just once, I would like to know what it feels like to belong, to feel at ease, to dance and sing with abandon, to feel alive and be able to believe that there is reason for hope.
I still have the scars on the bottom of my feet and the top of my head. Every day they remind me of the war. It's impossible to forget your past when you carry it with you on your body.
Where's Mila? I can't find her anywhere. Is she not on this ship?
Ma'am, the boat needs to leave the dock. Now.
We can't leave. I can't find my daughters.
Excuse me, miss. I did see two young girls playing in the water. The one looked like she may have been drowning.
What? I need to get off the ship. Mila!
At 6 years old, this is how my story started. Almost drowning. What's odd is that I was named after my uncle, who had drowned in the same body of water a few years before I was born. At this moment, we were on our long journey that would eventually take us to Kazakhstan. It was 1941, and our home Kiev had just been invaded by Germany. We were living under Soviet control when my uncle disappeared, and my father, who was a pediatric surgeon, had his entire savings taken from him. So my mother, father, older sister, grandparents, and I fled. We stopped at Dnipropetrovsk and Rostov before arriving in Kazakhstan. The journey took us 2 months. We arrived hungry, dirty, and very sick. We lived the first week on the streets because we couldn't find a place, but eventually found a room. My father was immediately sent to a military hospital on the front lines. I wish Dad were here. It would be so much easier. Ophelia, I'm so hungry.
I am too. But we already ate today. We need to save the rest for Mom, Grandma, and Grandpa. They haven't eaten.
And all we eat is rice. I'm so sick of rice. We've been eating it for almost an entire year now.
It's all we have for now. If I work for the farmers, maybe I can get us some potatoes.
Mama's crying again, and she hasn't gotten out of bed in days. All she does is sleep and cry. What do you think she's crying about? When do you think she will stop crying?
I don't know, Mila. Hopefully soon.
Ophelia, my head won't stop itching. It hurts.
You have to stop scratching it. It's lice. It makes it worse if you itch it.
And my feet hurt. I can't even wear my shoes anymore. They're bleeding on the bottom.
Just wipe your feet and rinse off the blood for now.
I really wish Mama would get out of bed. I wish she would stop crying.
We just have to keep taking care of her. She'll get better soon.
And just when you thought it couldn't get worse, it did. One day we were robbed, and it wasn't random. A group of men, tipped off by someone who knew us, came in and stole everything. This was one of the rare times that my mother was forced out of bed. I remember she pleaded with him.
Please, please, why are you doing this? We are refugees. We hardly have anything.
But he didn't care. He took everything he could find.
Wait, I'm begging you. Don't you have any compassion? Can't you just leave us something? Anything?
And for some reason, he did. He left one winter coat.
After this, we tried to go to the police, but later found out they had been involved. The police could not be trusted to help refugees. It was only when we wrote our father telling him what happened, the military police provided some relief. After 3 years, our father came back to us. We were extremely sick and depressed. We were malnourished from years of only eating rice and not receiving proper medical attention. We did eventually get better, but I still have bad teeth and scars on my body from this time. Kiev was liberated in 1943, but we didn't return until 1944. Our home was occupied, so we stayed 9 months with a woman whose niece was a patient of my father's. It took us 13 years to get an apartment that just belonged to us. Nazis may have killed us physically, but communists killed us physically and mentally. Living in a communist country and being Jewish could not have been worse. In 1953, my father, who was a very successful doctor, was fired because he was Jewish. Stalin told the Russian people that all Jewish doctors were trying to poison them. I wanted to go to medical school at this time, but I couldn't because of this. It was hard to get into any university at all because of anti-Semitism, despite having the highest grades in my class. It was only after my uncle fought for me that I was allowed to get an education. Everything just felt harder if you were Jewish. The answer was always no, nope, absolutely not. No Jews allowed. Despite being turned away for so many things, I did become an engineer, and then I got a master's in accounting. In 1995, my husband and I realized that we wanted a different life for our daughter. So we moved to the US where we could celebrate our Judaism. My grandson attends NYU, And nobody asked him if he was Jewish. He got in because he was smart and qualified, and that is it. How different from what my husband and I went through.
At times, the past feels far away, but the scars on my head and feet still remind me of what life was like. I then become much more grateful for the life I have created for myself and for my family in this country.
Is it hope that makes us want to live, or is it just a survival instinct?
I think that what we've been through, it's survival and it's hope. It's a combination of things. And we just have to keep going.
I have little hopes, not big ones. Did everybody listen to Biden yesterday? That was a hope. That felt like hope.
Yeah. Just that it is happening, and it just keeps happening. Maybe the numbers are different, but what difference does it make? People kill their own kind constantly. We're incredibly still uncivilized.
I was going to say, it's true throughout history that there's been violence and power plays and cruelty and murder and wars. It hasn't stopped throughout history. If you would just look back, it's something that's sort of part of humanity, it seems. It's part of nature too, but in humanity, we are more conscious. I think we are more conscious. It has to stop. There's no reason. The energy that's wasted in a negative way could be put in a positive way and help people. It's energy is energy.
I also don't quite know how to say it, but the reason we tell the story is somehow to make people aware of what should not happen again. But again, we come back to hope, and that's why I have little hope, because it just keeps happening. But as Lori said, somehow, maybe we could, by telling our stories, we could make people understand that they should commit themselves to peace.
And that we commit ourselves.
Yeah.
Taking personal accountability.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the famous word for this year, accountability.
Yes.
Why I live, I hope.
I think we live because we hope.
My hope is for people to actually be able to listen and talk with each other and connect with one another, rather than simply talking at each other. To actually engage in dialogue, even when it's hard and even when it's unfamiliar.
My hope is that history is kept alive through learning, talking, connecting with others, telling stories to friends and family, and most importantly, having an open mind.
I haven't the confidence for the kind of hope that might change the world. So I'll just hope to see the friends, old and young, whom I've met on our witness Zooms, in person, maybe on the benches around the monument where I live.
I hope that everyone can find peace for the future, but also remember and listen to the stories of the past.
I hope that one day we can all feel safe to dream.
My hope is that by sharing the tragic and sad events that happened to me, my family, and the other adults, survivors, and witness theater, we can ensure that the events that occurred not so long ago will not be forgotten, and that history will not repeat itself. Am Yisrael Chai.
My hope is that we all can realize that the things that happen to us do not define us.
I hope that mankind will learn lessons And Holocaust, like what happened before, will never ever happen again.
I hope that I can carry these stories with me and pass them on to my children.
My hope is for everyone to remember that real human beings were affected and always will be affected by the Holocaust. It isn't just a story, but a real lived experience.
I would like to be able to hope.
My hope is that we can go beyond the destructive, the evil, and know our place in the universe. We are stardust.